be talking about bills of materials and how we manage them within Inventor. When I talk about bills of material in this presentation, I also would like to kind of elaborate that it is also very, it's comparable to like AutoCAD Electrical, because AutoCAD Electrical, for example, has a catalog browser that has a whole sort of libraries of, different components that you use for your designs or schematic. In Inventor, we have Content Center, which has all the standard fasteners, screws, nuts, bolts, washers, and even some structural steel elements and things like that. So all of that still kind of ties into, a database that we're bringing into and tapping into, and then putting them into our drawings and documenting them as part of a requirement of this design. So when we talk about bills of material, especially in the Inventor world, we are talking about managing the collection of the components that we're having to use inside of a current design. Before we get too far into that, I like to talk about a little bit about myself. I am a father of 4 beautiful kids. They range from 18 all the way down to my youngest, which is 4. So we have quite the spread. We are, we are very big into outdoor fly fishing and fishing, camping sort of thing. I have 3 boys, so we all been through like Boy Scouts and things like that. In fact, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be going to USS Massachusetts, which is a battleship that's situated in Connecticut, where we, with the Boy Scouts, will be staying overnight on board that ship. So we're looking forward to that experience and going fly fishing, and I'm going to turn it into sort of a fishing trip as well. As Ashley mentioned, I am an applications engineer at Hageman. My roles include training and teaching on Autodesk software. I just completed a advanced assembly training for Inventor, but most of my training has been situated around, Vault, Inventor, AutoCAD, and some of the AutoCAD verticals, such as, you have AutoCAD mechanical, electrical, and things like that. Tech support is something that we also offer as services, and that is also one of the hats that I wear. So when I am not teaching, there's oftentimes that I am on the tech support team and providing support for our customers, such as yourselves, and just helping with any kinds of problems that you might run into, whether it's Inventor's not starting, or missing files or anything like that. We try to help and facilitate our customers by providing that tech support. And then the final thing that I also do is consulting and implementing. After this webinar, I've got to jump onto another call, and I will be basically performing my role as a consultant, then talking with a person about data management and how they receive files. So, my role as an application engineer is very fun, and I enjoy working with the Hagerman team. A little bit of the background information about me. As far as where I came from in the background, I wasn't always an applications engineer. I actually, the bulk of my career has been working with structural engineering firms around New York State. And most of that had been like Revit, AutoCAD, or even Inventor. There was a couple of times where we were working on hydraulic arms that were inside of a building that basically provided a lift for a stage contraction of some sort. So the other experience that I've had is I used to work at Eastman Kodak in the research and development, and there I was basically responsible for helping with mechanical designs of their they had some machines that basically were measuring the rolls of paper and getting it down to a certain distance, and then we would go and do some tests and analysis on that particular area. So, so my experience had been kind of, mostly in the Inventor world when it comes to working with the real world scenario, real world life, I guess you can say. So now let's go ahead and talk about, the bill of material versus a parts list. Okay. Inventor has 2 areas that we deal with the components of our assembly. Those components that when you can see on the left side, that's a complete bill of material of an existing assembly and all the components that make it up. Whereas on the right side, we have a parts list that is typically used on our drawing, such as DWGs or IDWs that Inventor uses. Now, what's the main difference between those two concepts? Well, the bill of material is a single master list, if you will, of everything that's in there. It's going to show you up-to-date information such as children count, the quantities of the which could be weight as well, mass, and then ultimately properties. What sort of properties do we, what sort of properties am I talking about? Well, you can see in this list here, we have, part number, we have bill of material structure kind of listed there, where we can specify how the part is going to be accounted for within our bill of materials. So for example, is it purchased or is it something that we manufacture? Descriptions and things like that. When you think about custom properties, when we get into the field of custom properties, you think about perhaps those custom properties are fields in your documents or your title block, or they're going to be mapped into maybe Vault, your data management system, your central repository for all of your engineering files if you use that product. And so those properties can be tied into a bill of material where we can manage it. And what I wanted to show today is how this single list can be very powerful, especially with working with those properties. So now that we have sort of an understanding that the bill of materials is that master list, how does it tie into a parts list? What is that, right? Well, the parts list is what we pull up as a report. It basically is a report that is generated based on our bill of material listing. We can have different types of reports. We can have, parts lists that have different formats. So as an example, on the right here, you can see I have two parts lists, but they're showing me some information that, one may not have the, the sub assemblies component. It may have different pieces of information. It might be, filtered with different, item numbers. It could be anything. It's a report that we are pulling that may be sorted, filtered, and have different numberings based on that particular report. So think about the parts list as more of a report that you're putting in onto your document. Now, what I'm going to do is kind of switch over to Inventor and kind of show how we can utilize that pair, that combination to our advantage. So here I have a mechanical pencil, and as you can imagine, there's, we got some components on the inside. So if I turn the visibility off, you can see that there's some pieces inside of here that makes up that internal workings. When we deal with our designs, our bill of materials, we think about all of the physical aspects of this, all the components that we have here. Whether it's a spring that's inside here or the dispenser, the eraser that's in this cap here, you think about those. But what about, when we think about what we're going to include with this, this assembly, right? So when you think about, for example, say I'm working with a manufacturer company, John Deere, and we got the engine components, we got the alternator, the water pump, the fuel pump, and things like that. And sometimes with those packaging, we might include additional parts, additional bolts or something like that. Maybe it's grease packets, right? How do we model grease packets? Well, we don't, right? What we do is within the bill of materials, we have the ability to use something called virtual component that basically will be a line entry in here. And so to create that, all I have to do is go into an assembly file, hit the create button up here, just as if I'm going to create a new file, but instead I'm going to specify that it's a virtual component. Let's say that I have a lead holder, right? So every mechanical pencil usually has a lead holder that has extra, lead erasers and things like that. I'm not going to model that. I'm just going to add that because that's going to be part of my bill of material for this particular, pencil or a mechanical pencil. So by putting that into my assembly as a virtual component, it now has some accountability inside of my bill of material. So I can put a quantity, I can put some descriptions and things like that. You'll notice the material says generic on that. If we take a look at the bill of material tab here, okay, we can see that there's 3 different tabs here that is associated with the bill of material, and they all have to do with how the information is being displayed. On the far right is that part only that just shows you only the parts. So when we think about an assembly, components of the assemblies can be parts and a subassembly which houses more components. So the parts only will show and reflect just the part. But if I want to kind of show it in a structured manner where I want to see the subassembly, I can do that. Now, sometimes our bill of material needs to have a little bit more information about that subassembly and its component. An assembly like this, it's not very complicated. There's not very many pieces here. But if you're dealing something like a John Deere tractor, you can imagine all those subcomponents that you have, alternator, the fuel pumps, all those different the components that make up those individual elements of the motor. That can, make a bill of material list complicated. So this allows us to manage that. We'll be able to specify what we want to be displayed. But keep in mind that what you do in this view isn't what happens on a document, because this is just to help us facilitate and review the bill of material here. What I mean by that is being able to, add some property information. We can certainly do that. So you can see that there's a stock number. Some of them have stock numbers and some of them don't. So I can actually take some of the information and, kind of copy and paste and start populating with some information that's associated with that. We have this guy here that's missing some a part number field here. So using this, I can just copy and paste some of the values here. Now you'll notice that I get the varies. Well, why is this happening, right? Because you see the database that we are dealing with. I'm going to go ahead and do an. I'm going to explain what's happening here. The database that we're dealing with, or I kind of let the cat out of the bag there with the bill of material. It's a database, right? That is actually tapping into the actual properties of these components. So when I go and make a change to the properties in here, they're actually getting pushed down to the components here. So when we see it says varies, it recognizes, hey, you use the same part number on 2 components, and you can see them right in here. They're highlighting on the left side in the model tree. They're completely different. However, they have different materials assignment to them. That's why it quickly went to varies. So, this is one of the things that we have to be aware of and be when we go through this, is that we have to exercise caution about, what information that we're changing, making sure, I did the copy and paste thinking, yeah, I can, make my life easier, but then you can see that it just combined these two. And you can see that if I go back to the parts only list, you're going to see that we have these still shows that those 2 components, it's organizing by the parts number. Now, one thing I can do to fix, excuse me, one thing I can do to fix this is go into the properties of these guys here, opening the files and editing them from there. I can go and tweak the sort. Right now, they're automatically merging the cells together. And if we take a look at the top here, we have some functionalities that allow us to address, how we view our tabs here. So I'm looking at the parts only. You can see that it's numeric. There's alpha settings that we can change for the numbering. So we can change how the numbering is going to be displayed here on this list. In this one here, I can go into the view properties and change whether I want to show, the, I guess, extra digits to it, like it's like more precision, I guess. But if I want to add a couple zeros in front, or if I want to go ahead and show all levels of that. Now, when I change it to all levels, what that does, it allows me to display my subcomponents of my subassembly. Now, I'm going to go and fix this data here by just going to one of these files here. I'm going to just go ahead and open it. And if we take a look at the properties of this, you see that this is where it got that value there. So I'm going to go ahead and just put, 39 on there, and I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to close it. This is what's nice about the bill of material. I am not going to hit save. I'm not going to do any of that. But if I go back to my assembly here and I take a look at my bill of material here, you'll notice that we now have a 39. This data is live. It's looking at those properties active. So I can, like I said, I can make the changes through this bill of materials table list that can update the properties. Here's something else that may be added value about bill of materials and managing it here. I'm going to add a custom property to my assembly. And let's say that, the custom property I need to have, you can see there's one that says Copilot here, but I'm going to create one that's going to be stock number. Okay. So I'm going to put that in there, and I can put a value here for the initial value for this is the parent assembly that I'm putting this in here. So I can just go ahead and just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, something like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit add. And now I have that property, that custom property that only lives at that master assembly. If I go back into the configured sleeve that I have here, and I take a look at the properties here, you're going to find that within this property, the custom does not have that stock number. But check this out. You go into the bill of material list here, and if you use the add custom iProperties to this list, you'll see that I can add a column here that allows me to put in the stock number, because it's actually in my master assembly here. It allows me to pull this information here, and I can start putting in some information. Now, if you remember, Dan, you put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not listed here. Yes, you're right, because that stock number that I put in was actually for the parent assembly, nothing with these guys down here. So what I'm going to do is go to the part 39 that I just have open, which is the sleeve here. I'm going to go ahead and just put in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and, let's put 0, 2. Okay, so that's my stock number. I'm very creative with this. So that's in there. I'm going to go ahead and say done. And when I come in here, it now shows that. So the bill of material not only is looking at live data that's coming from your components, but it also serves as a medium where you can push some information back to your components. And one thing I do also like to do, and this is what when I teach Inventor, I tell people about bill of material is, sometimes, we go and we put in our designs, we start working on it. And the one thing that we always do, we always end up with this generic material assignment to, a part. So we take a look at this as a clip. This should be, a stainless steel, or let's put it steel. So I can come down here and pick out, let's do stainless steel like I was going to originally do, and change the material assignment of that. And that again pushes back down to the part. So this is where we're massaging and making sure that our assembly is all correct. And that's one thing about, taking the power of bill of material into your hand and pushing it, throughout the entire assembly. Now, other things that we can do within the dialog is to export. Now, there's 2 levels of exports, and I have no idea why there's a difference between these. But there's an export button down here. This is limiting to a single format, whereas this guy here, which is I push this button here that looks like the bill of materials in the background and a yellow floppy disk here. I'll exit out of that. There it is. All right. So if I click on that, this one has that additional step that allows us to specify, well, what are we wanting to bring in? So it knows that we have a structured and then we have a parts only. And so I want to go with structured, and then I want to export all levels. That includes the subcomponent. Now, if I go ahead and click OK, I can export it to a text file, an Excel file, both flavors of Excel. So we have the XLSX, and then we have the XLS. So anything prior to 2013, you could still save to that if you need to. Now, why would we want to export this? Why would we want to export to any of these formats if we have that bill of material? And this is one of the things that is not recognized as much as the power of the bill of material. But sometimes you have ERP systems. We're going to later on, I'm going to take this information here from the flywheel that I have, and I'm going to show you how we can bring that in, use that export file and use it into our vault. So this is a way or a medium to export the information that we have in our bill of material to a third-party format that we can push out to our ERPs or a data management system or a PLM, any system that you want. Now, there's a third tab over here that says model data, okay? This model data will basically be the tab that always reflects how things appear on the model tree. So you'll see that it also shows the individual components below it. And usually, when I'm talking about, modifying properties or anything like that, I usually recommend just doing it from this tab, because then that way when you have, if you're working with your structured and you start off with, remember what I was saying about the parts list, it's a report. So when you start off with the report, however you have it structured or set up here kind of plays a small role in the outcome of what you put in the parts list. However, in the parts list, we still have the ability to go and change our formatting and to update those to, display things based on our sorting, based on filters, based on, what is it that we want to display. Now, this export button down here, I wanted to show the difference here. You can see that it has example files. And if we go to this drop down, you'll see that it says example and then it says all files. So can I, say all files and type in, CSV? I'm sure you could do that. But I'm kind of like very OCD, where I'll go through the actual wizard and make sure that I get it done correctly. And that way I don't have any, questions that something with the formatting got upset or something it didn't work. So now with the bill of materials, like I said earlier, this is the actual data that we will be seeing in our assembly. These are components. This is not what you're going to get on your, the format, I should say. It's not what you're going to be getting on your documents when you start the parts list. However, you can start adding in. You can see there's a bunch of properties in here that are in. When I go and generate the parts list, they're not going to be there. So let's go ahead and switch gears and go into a document. And so I have a document that has, we got a section view that's cutting through the pencil. We got a couple of, we got a side view. We got a couple of base views here. We got a base view here. We got an auxiliary view here. So when we, get to this point of documenting, we can't just summon the bill of material. You see, if we go into the Manage tab, there is no bill of material button here. But if we go in the Annotate tab, there's the parts list. This is where it comes out as a, quote, report. The moment that I click on that, I'm initiating the report process. You'll notice that the first thing that it says here is to select a view. What we're essentially selecting is the view that's associated to the assembly in question. It's already captured the assembly. It's going to pull that assembly bill of material into this report. Now, how we want it to be displayed is specified here. You'll notice that right now it sets a structured and it has all levels. That is because, and it's kind of grayed out. That is because the original bill of material is specifying that, to show all levels. If I switch that over to single, this would come back to single. So we have that, we still have that little control at the bill of material list, from the assembly level that we need to go and specify exactly what we want from there. So when we initiate that report, it pops up. You'll notice that there's other things down here that allow for table wrapping. So if your list gets long, super long, how do you want it to wrap, left or right? And that all kind of comes down to the formatting of your table. Now, if I go ahead and just click OK and just put in this bill of material here, I have a bill of material, or a parts list, I should say. I can run this command again. I can run it on the same guy, and I can come in here and specify a different, set of options in terms of the table wrap and enable that. But the power of having these two, or the power of a parts list, is that when you double click on it, you're now given sort of a new opportunity to address the formatting. So you'll see we have the quantities listed here. Maybe I want the item number on the end or something. I can take this column and move it over to the other side here. There's a red line that's going to pop up right there. I have that kind of format. Now I'm going to hit apply on purpose here, and you're going to notice that it moved this independent of this formatting. So that's where I was saying that these part numbers, or I'm sorry, part list, becomes reports. Now there is something that we can do if we wanted to show more to them, right? So I want to show material. So I can go and choose the column chooser by simply right-clicking on the header and coming over here and choosing the material from this list. So here's material, so I'm going to add that over. I'm going to push that up, and then I'm going to go ahead and push OK, say OK, and here they're listed here. Now in here I can customize the material, but you remember when I was in the bill of material list, I can actually go and drop down the drop down and pick out the different material. See, that's the difference with the parts list here. The parts list, when we start double clicking and populating this, we're actually overriding, and that's what that blue box here is showing. It's basically saying that we've overwrote that value from this parts list. If I go ahead and say OK, you'll see it say steel, but if I go to the clip here, you're going to see that it's probably still set to stainless steel because, well, there's not a matching entry for steel. So if there is a matching entry, and say if I take titanium and I put it up here, it will switch the material for us, but it has to be exactly as it's called out inside of the material library. So the parts list, still showing me that it's it's overwritten here, does give us the ability, and there are some reasons why we might want to do an override. I'm going to return that by just clearing this out, and that should resolve the material there. But when I come over here, say if I have that, remember the virtual component, the lead holder, I want to make some changes to the quantities. Well, there's going to be 2 in this, right? So by typing in 2, I now have 2 that are set within this parts list. Now, that might not be as powerful as you think by having that override, but what if I have a drawing, all right? All right, so here's, and in this same drawing, we have the quantity of the lead holder. It's the same because it is still overriding that. But what if I wanted in another drawing a different quantity? Well, this allows me to do that because it's a report based on a drawing or based on a parts list that we put into a document. Now in this, I'm going to do another parts list on this view here, and instead of just kind of putting it under anywhere, I'm going to put it down over here just to kind of show the formatting capabilities, or where you can separate those. So once again, I'm going to go with structured. I'm going to say okay. I'm going to put this in place here. I'm going to kind of lock it over here in this lower left corner. But there's something that I would like to do about this. I want the headers to be at the bottom. So if I go into the parts list here, you're going to basically go into the table layout, and now you can adjust it where the header is coming from. So it's going to be at the bottom. You can adjust the formatting of it, what fonts that's going to be utilized in this. Here's where we can go back and adjust if it's going to be wrapped left or right. If I hit the expand button here, what will happen is now the table shows the complete list, including all of the subcomponents of that assembly. Again, even though this is a separate document, all right, if I go back to my first document, it has no weight or bearing on that because, like I said, these are reports that are specifically for a document. Oops, I double clicked on that. There we go. Now, if we take a look at this list here, recall that that override I set for the lead holder, right? That was set to 2 on my first document, and here it's set to 1. It's still set with the default entry. So you may have the same assembly, right? Maybe a different logo. We have Autodesk Inventor on this. Maybe on this second assembly that you're going to change the clip, and that's going to have a different style clip. You might even create a separate assembly if you wanted to. Sometimes people use the view representations or the model state to actually show the different variations or instances of the, and that bill of material would reflect based on what's in that view or that model state that you choose. And so you may have the same assembly with a different part that this is enabled, and the parts list will reflect that. The bill of material will reflect that. Okay. So what other things that we can do with, a parts list? Well, in a parts list, we also have the ability to save it out as or export as a file format here. And so you can see that from here, I can pretty much do the same thing I did before. Now this will export that quote unquote report where you have custom overrides or any of those settings that you might have manually overwritten and put into place that would show up on this report. Whereas the bill of material, if you were to export from there and you made some changes as to some of the values here, it is actually pushing the actual values down to those components. Now, when we export, there could be various reasons why we export. One is simply the fact that we're exporting Excel files to maybe a vendor. Maybe, we outsource some of these, for these parts. Maybe it's, getting a list down to the shops people so they can start putting the assembly together. They know what parts number they got to get together to put together for a mechanical pencil or to gather those all those items together. Or you're just simply going to export it into and import it into an ERP system and things like that. The process I'm going to show you is more of a manual process. Hagerman has a method that allows for automating that process, so it makes a little bit, and we'll talk about that a little later, but it basically will eliminate the process that I'm just about to show you, where you have to go and do a couple of clicks and picks and get the thing. So the first thing you have to do is, okay, what are we exporting? We exporting the parts list, or are we going to export directly from a bill of material? So in the flywheel assembly I've already taken the liberty of going into my bill of material, going in here and then exporting it as a structured item and putting it as a CSV file. So if I go ahead and do that right now, go ahead and replace it. It updates that one. We'll get out of here. So remember, I had to open up the assembly. I had to come over to the bill of material. I had to hit the export. There's a lot of clicks that we have to do. If you are working with the Vault, do you have to take ownership of the file, check out the file? No, not really, if you're not going to make any changes. But if you're going to make changes to the bill of material, you're going to update some properties or things like that, then of course you're going to have to check it out and then you can export it. So, but still, there's a little bit of work that's involved to get to the export process. Now, this is a simple, assembly. Now, if you think about a larger assembly that has 500 parts, 1,000 parts, right? We're going to go and import this stuff into Vault, for example, right? Vault has an item master, and item master is portrayed as sort of the Vault's quote unquote bill of material. I have all these files checked in. They're all situated inside of my vault. So if I go to the flywheel folder, my flywheels are going to be in there. But the item master, is separate from that. I can attach files to items. I can bring those into an item and then use the item master as a way to exert a state of control. Why would we have that kind of state of control? Maybe we don't want edits to happen when they shouldn't be happening. In other words, the file has been released. Why are we editing this now without a reason or rhyme to it? So the item master kind of helps us with that kind of level of control in terms of vault. But what I want you to think about, not just item master, what I want you to think about is like, okay, you're going to import it into your ERP system or MRP system or your data management system. The process that you need to do. If it's manual, what you have to do. And this is how we do, an item master. So I'd have to come into the item master, have to go up to the file, have to hit the import item, make sure I go and browse for the actual CSV file, and then comes the fun part. Okay, so you think you're done here. I'm all right, right? I'm gonna hit that next button. Wait, what do you mean I have to map properties? Oh yes, you have to map properties. You have to map what information to what pieces of property inside of the vault. And I've already done that here. But what's really nice is once you do this once, you can save this map, and then that way you can call it up again. You can even share this mapping to other colleagues if you have to. But still, the process to get to this point, somebody had to go and click just to get a CSV file. And now we're going to go and do this import. Now, I'm making it sound so easy by just, you just go and click and things like, but there's a lot more to it. I'm doing, a smaller assembly. When you got a very large assembly, that could take time, and that's you waiting for this computer. So, while it's processing that import, you might take a step and go to the, to get some coffee and wait and come back and you realize it's still doing it. All right, let me go back. It's all subjected to, your system's capabilities and performance. Okay. Now, in this particular thing, you can see that, oh, it's not allowing me to hit import. What's going on? Well, there's a conflict. So this is the other element that you have to deal with when you're doing imports manually. You have to, I probably did not do something correct in terms of exporting or the mapping. In this case, we're going to find that the problem comes down to the actual unit is set to box. Well, that's not even a unit. So I need to change that out and make sure that I set it up to the appropriate unit of measure. So one box is not, a unit, right? Now when I say done, you'll see that it's resolved that for all of them, and now I can hit the import. So to this extent, you go through this process, you still have to massage the data, you still have to make sure things are right. You still have to make sure that the information that you're mapping is correct. And if you get to this point and you realize, oh, shoot, it's wrong, you have to hit the back button, go through the process and get the mapping correct, and then, try and fix the conflict if you can. But now that it's fixed, I'm gonna go ahead and hit that import. We'll get a report indicating that it's reported in here. This is where the bill of material or the parts list, whichever you exported, starts to work for you. See, now I don't have to go manually saying right click, new item, put in the information based on what it is. So if it's an assembly file, say okay, come down here, specify the information, where, what the title is, what the description is. With that import, I was able to do it with a few more clicks, but I still had to get that data massage. And that's where automation kind of comes in hand and can help with this process. So if, the data that you're bringing in, let's face it, the data that we bring in, it's always, we always have a number. In this case, I've actually mapped my stock number to the numbers category. So this number always will be unique. The title is based on the name of the file. those metadata could be mapped into sort of a pre-program, autopilot, if you will. So that as soon as you go and push that one button or you specify a course of action, it will do it for you, and it'll go and create this without having you to jump through several hula hoops to go and define what you're importing, what you're getting. It would, we have ways of automating those things. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my PowerPoint presentation. So I hope that kind of helped with, see if I can start. I always forget how I can do this, but I'm going to see if I can reset the slideshow. Nope, didn't work. So I'm going to fast forward it for us. So when we get to working with bill of materials, always remember that the bill of materials is live data that is being pulled from the assembly. It will always have the, the children counts, the quantity, the weight, the mass, properties can be edited. All of that could be edited, changed, tweaked within the bill of material. But if we try to go and change those values in a parts list, we're actually initiating a override, which doesn't necessarily change what's back at the parts or the components themselves. Now, what are the next steps here? Now that we, the bill of material is complete, we clean things up. You get your bill of materials under control. You take the reins and get it under control. You start sharing your bill of materials. And so what is the method that you share, right? And this is where we're talking about, you might send out an Excel file. You're going to, number one, you put it on a drawing, right? You start that sharing process by putting that information as a parts list on a drawing, so that when you release that drawing, you're sharing that information. Well, the other thing, as we just kind of covered over, is exporting. You export to Excel, CSV files. Why would we do that? So we can get it into, either a Vault item master, and I should actually kind of come back to that point. Notice it says Vault Pro. Vault Pro is the only flavor of Vault that has an item master. So if you have Vault Basic, item master is not available there. What's the other reason why we might import or export? As I mentioned earlier, ERPs, MRPs, PLMs, all of these different systems and integration. When you are importing information, the last thing you want to do is manually create the information. So we can automate that by using programming, using a script. We have ways of doing that ourselves, and fortunately for us today, Forrest, who is on with us for support, he actually is one of those members that work with that process, or he would be able to review your information and see how we can best help you get that. Notice that at the end it says with or without Vault. Because sometimes you have other products. Maybe you don't have Vault. Maybe you have an MRP system or an ERP system or a PLM, that's completely different from Vault. We can still help you with that. If you have any questions, or you want to talk to us and get a feel for how we can help you, we'd love to talk to you. We would love to arrange a call and sit down and talk to you over the phone and see what we can do to help improve your workflow, because at the end of the day, it's about you. A recent survey that we had pulled from another or a poll, I should say, that we pulled from another webinar, kind of revealed some interesting facts. This is based out of there was about 200 people that was in attendance, and the survey points here shows, if you look at the first two items, it says parts lists on the drawing are manually ERP systems, and then the second one was export to spreadsheets and manually putting them into ERP system. That accounts for roughly 65% of the people were manually inputting stuff into ERP system. Imagine, trying to do that for, 500 parts, right? Manually to put that stuff in there, that could take time. That's where the automation kind of comes in. If you look at the third one, you can see that only 29% was actually using the export and import functionality. I mean, the number is high, but you still have a little manual process, because even with that, that was a manual process of clicking on that button that says, okay, import, and then mapping all those fields. And depending on your solution, whether it's a PLM or ERP system or a data management system, you may have to go and adjust the mapping. It still has a manual processing. Only 2% actually have an automated system that would help them eliminate, time that it takes to manually put in, entries, manually do the workflow. So don't let your BOM data die with just, Inventor and or into a vault. Find out how it can help work for you and how we can help you with automating that information. At this time, I'm going to open the floor up to any questions. And I'm going to put on the screen our website that has the list of all of the available training that we have, whether it's Inventor, whether it's AutoCAD Electrical, AutoCAD Architectural. I'll put that on screen here. And I thank you for your attendance. So were there any questions? All right, so, well, Ashley, I think that wraps it up. I don't see any questions here. Forrest, were there any questions that appeared?
None that I saw.
All right. All right, well, thanks again for your attendance, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And, keep us in mind if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to talk and assist and help you with any of your automation requests. Thanks and have a wonderful day.